In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, February 14th. North Korea fires several cruise missiles into the East Sea earlier on this Wednesday in yet another display of open defiance amid regional security concerns. Meanwhile, Seoul's Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok says advanced technologies including quantum cloud computing and urban air mobility will spur South Korea's economic growth this year. And Hwang Sun-woo garners gold in the men's 200-meter freestyle at the World Aquatics Championships in Qatar, becoming the first Korean swimmer to earn medals at 3 world races in a row. We start with news. A fresh missile test launched several cruise missiles off its eastern coast near the port city of Wonsan. Now, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the launch at around 9 a.m. on this Wednesday. Intelligence authorities here and over in the U.S. are conducting a detailed analysis of the latest launch. North Korea has been engaged in multiple testings of cruise missiles since the start of this year. And despite concerns over its blatant defiance, North Korea appears to be expanding its engagements with Russia to include both cultural as well as political interactions. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil reports.
North Korea has opened its arms to tourists from Russia. According to a Facebook post by the Russian embassy in Pyongyang, 100 Russian tourists arrived in the North's capital on February 9th. The embassy said this was the first visit after North Korea opened its borders following a 4-year closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The tourists included representatives of the tourism industry and media and travelers from all over Russia, from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. It added the tourists will stay in the north for 4 days and get acquainted with key attractions in Pyongyang while visiting the Masikmyeong ski resort, known as one of the most modern major ski resorts the regime built. The recent hype in Pyongyang-Moscow exchanges hasn't stopped there. On Monday, a delegation of the regime's ruling party officials left Pyongyang to visit Russia. North Korea's official newspaper Rodong-Sinmun reported Tuesday that the delegation is on the trip at the invitation of Russia's ruling United Russia Party. The delegation plans to attend an international inter-party forum organized by the Russian party. A senior official at South Korea's Unification Ministry told reporters on Tuesday the government has no comment on ordinary interactions between Pyongyang and Moscow, but added that any illegal interactions such as arms transfers or labor dispatches will need to stop as they violate the UN Security Council resolutions. Moscow and Pyongyang have been strengthening ties ever since North Korean leader Kim Jongun made a rare overseas trip to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin last September. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea's Navy and Marine Corps are heading to Thailand on this Wednesday to take part in an annual multinational military exercise. The Navy's 4,900-ton No Chok-pong landing ship, carrying some 330 personnel, will join the exercise, dubbed Cobra Gold, from February 26th to March 8th. The South Korean military is mobilizing 6 assault amphibious vehicles, 2 K-55 self-propelled howitzers, and a K-77 fire direction center vehicle. A total of 6 countries, including the US and Japan, are taking part, with China and India participating as observers. Jointly hosted by the Thai and American militaries, Cobra Gold seeks to bolster security in the Asia-Pacific region, mainly for peace-related purposes. On the domestic front, the South Korean economy will expand 2.2% this year. Now, this is according to a state-run think tank that added external factors remain a tangible concern. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin has more.
The Korea Development Institute has maintained its economic outlook estimate for this year at 2.2%. In its revised forecast published Wednesday, the South Korean state-run economic think tank kept its outlook unchanged from its November 2023 estimate. The KDI, which typically releases economic outlook comprehensive reports in May and November, also released 2 additional revised forecasts in February and August last year to reflect the rapidly changing economic conditions. November's economic growth estimate for 2024 at 2.2% was slightly lower than the 2.3% forecast in May and August. The think tank has kept its estimate unchanged in this year's report as exports are expected to continue to see a recovery. Total exports were estimated to grow 4.7%, up from KDI's original forecast as the chip sector shows signs of improvement. Concerns about external factors are slightly mitigated as the International Monetary Fund last month raised economic outlooks for major economies from its previous estimate released in October last year. China's economic growth was adjusted upward on the back of government stimulus measures despite the ongoing real estate crisis in the country. And growth in the U.S. economy is expected to boost South Korea's exports. The IMF also upgraded its outlook for the world economy to 3.1%, pointing to a more resilient growth in the global economy this year. Domestic demand, however, continues to remain sluggish amid a recovery in exports and improvements in the global economy. For consumer inflation, the KDI revised downward its forecast slightly to 2.5% from 2.6%. And private spending, which was also adjusted downwards by 0.1%, is not expected to show drastic improvement anytime soon.
The current sluggishness in private consumption is attributed to the persisting high interest rates, hindering immediate improvement. It's unlikely to expect a boost in private consumption this year as high interest rates are likely to continue.
And risk factors from geopolitical tensions in the Middle East that could lead to rising oil prices and trade disruptions might also weaken South Korea's economic growth. 이수진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., inflation accelerated 3.1% on year in January, faster than an earlier forecast of 2.9% amid higher housing expenses. Our Yoon has mourned this finding and its broader implications.
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on Tuesday that the U.S. Consumer Price Index, a broad-based measure of the prices shoppers face for goods and services across the economy, increased 3.1% on year in January, which was above the market expectation of 2.9%. On month, inflation fell 0.3 percentage points from December's reading of 3.4%, which is much slower than expected. Excluding volatile food and energy prices, so-called core CPI accelerated 0.4% in January and was up 3.9% from a year ago, unchanged from December. Shelter prices contributed mainly to the increase, with the index rising 6% on year. Taking up about one-third of the CPI weighing, the index for shelter prices climbed 0.6% on the month. On a 12-month basis, shelter costs rose 6%. After closing at a new record high on Friday, the S&P 500 inched down 0.1% on Monday. And after the CPI inflation data was released, the S&P 500 fell sharply in Tuesday's stock market action, sliding a further 1.3%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average sank more than 520 points, or 1.4% on Tuesday, its worst one-day percentage decline since March 22, 2023. And the Nasdaq Composite fell 1.8%. Still, the big three indexes were trading higher on year. Fed officials expect inflation to recede back to their 2% annual target, largely because they expect shelter prices to decelerate through the year. But January's increase could be an obstacle for the central bank that's been looking to relax monetary policy, which is at its highest in more than 2 decades. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news, the anticipated merger between Korean Air and Asiana Airlines has moved a step closer to reality, given the European Union's latest approval, albeit with certain conditions. Our Choi Soo-hyung explains.
Korean Air's planned merger with Asiana Airlines got approval from the European Commission on Tuesday local time. The approval comes almost 3 years after Korean Air submitted its proposed acquisition of Asiana to the EU. Now, out of the 14 competition regulators, just one last approval from the United States is needed. However, the EU's approval is conditional due to the Commission's concerns that the merger could harm competition. As a result, Korean Air needs to remedy the EU's concerns in both passenger and cargo services. In passenger flights, Korean Air will enable rival airline T-Way, a low-cost carrier, to start flights between Incheon and Barcelona, Paris, Frankfurt and Rome. These 4 air routes overlap with Asiana. Also, Korean Air will divest Asiana's global cargo business. The air industry forecasts that the divestment will take place no later than October this year. The Commission said Korean Air can only implement the merger on Asiana upon full compliance with these remedies. The industry expects that the Commission's in-depth investigation for these approval will mark as a milestone for future mergers involving other airlines. As the approval from the US is still left to be done, Korean Air plans to finalize its merger procedure as soon as possible. If the US approves, Korean Air is expected to rank within the top 15 in the passenger services and within the top 10 in the cargo services globally. Hwang, Arirang News.
Building Busan into a global business hub is part of the Yoon administration's plan for broader, balanced growth across the nation. Our senior top office correspondent Oh Soo-young covers this initiative.
South Korea will enact a special law to turn the city of Busan into a global business hub as the country looks to narrow regional gaps and spur development across areas outside the capital. That's according to President Yoon on Tuesday during the 11th round of policy discussions with citizens in the southern coastal city. Focusing on balanced regional development, Yoon extended a series of forums focusing on people's livelihoods to areas outside of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province. Busan was the first stop, the very venue where Yoon last year pledged to usher in a local era, giving regional governments more regulatory freedom to shape policies when it comes to promoting business, creating commercial zones, education and cultural assets. With the aim of turning Busan into the country's second major city, Yoon said Busan would pursue 3 landmark policies to enhance people's livelihoods: boost jobs and economic activities, health and welfare services, with targeted education policies to nurture talent. He said the special law for Busan would aim to foster logistics, finance and high-tech sectors, establishing a new airport on Gadokdo Island by 2029, redeveloping the North Port, and relocating the Korea Development Bank to the city to boost financing, as well as develop a second Centum commercial district to foster startups. Also emphasising education and cultural development, Yoon pledged to support childcare and education by backing the construction of a children's hospital in Busan, and also the city's major cultural industries such as film and sports. With the so-called Busan model as an example, he said efforts to develop non-capital areas would help overcome their shrinking demographics, as well as the country's chronically low birth rate.
진정한 지방 시대를 열어가기 위해서는 산업과 일자리만으로는 부족합니다. 교육, 의료, 문화를 비롯한 지역의 정주 여건을 확 바꿔서 삶의 질을 확실하게 높여야 합니다.
Earlier in the day, the president called on his secretaries to formulate tax incentives and subsidies for firms that develop policies that encourage employees to have children. South Korea's birth rate is the lowest in the world, currently at 0.78 children per woman, and is expected to further drop to around 0.6 this year. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Staying with the Yoon administration's agenda for 2024, the government intends to promote growth this year by jump-starting a number of projects, including quantum cloud computing and urban air mobility. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea will launch a cloud service utilizing domestically developed quantum computers in the latter half of this year. That's according to plans to foster new growth industries, which were announced during an emergency economic meeting hosted by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok on Wednesday.
The government will work towards creating tangible results in new growth industries, including mobility and biotech, which can serve as future pillars of our economy.
It will do so by launching cloud services using Korean-developed 20-qubit quantum computers. The plan includes developing related technologies to secure a 50-qubit quantum computing system by 2026 and a 1,000-qubit system by 2032. The higher the qubit count, the faster the processing speed and greater the accuracy. To take a step closer to achieving its goal of commercializing urban air mobility by 2025, the government is pushing to begin flight tests of UAM vehicles in metropolitan areas. It plans to provide tailored regulatory exemptions. Ongoing efforts are being made to establish an institutional framework, including safety standards, to achieve the commercialization of fully autonomous driving in 2027. The government has also pledged to further support key industries such as chips, displays, batteries, and shipbuilding. It is also expanding tax incentives for semiconductor-related technologies. 신하영, Arirang News.
On the cultural front, it's been almost 2 years since Cheongwadae, the former presidential office, opened its doors to the public. And according to Seoul's Culture Ministry on this Wednesday, over 5 million people have visited the venue thus far. In fact, the visitor count surpassed the 5 million mark this past Saturday. The complex has been open to the public since May 2022. Tickets are free and can be booked online. In sports news, Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo finished first in the men's 200-meter freestyle at this year's World Aquatics Championships in Qatar. Our Ising has the highlights.
South Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo claimed the top podium spot on Tuesday after winning gold in the men's 200-meter freestyle event at the World Championships in Qatar. In the race at the Aspire Dome in Doha, Hwang finished in 1 minute 44.75 seconds ahead of Danas Rapsis of Lithuania and Luke Hobson of the United States. Hwang had the quickest reaction time off the blocks with 0.62 seconds and was ahead until the 150-meter mark when Hobson took the lead from the South Korean. Hwang, however, took over in the final stretch, passing Hobson in the final seconds to win his first career world title. His latest gold medal finish makes him the first South Korean to win a medal at 3 straight swimming world championships, as he won silver in the 200-meter freestyle 2 years ago and followed that up with a bronze last year. Hwang's medal was South Korea's 4th in Doha, the most the country has won at a single world championship. On Monday, Kim Woo-min won gold at the men's 400-meter freestyle, while South Korea picked up 2 bronze medals in diving. Hwang will now compete in the men's 100-meter freestyle event and the 4x200-meter freestyle relay with hopes of more medals in Doha. 이승재, Arirang News.
The United Nations has raised concerns of the potential ruthless repercussions of a full-scale ground offensive by Israel into Rafah, where more than half of Gaza's population is sheltering from the war. Speaking on Tuesday ahead of a Security Council meeting, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres shared hopes for tangible negotiations to prevent such a scenario. Also, on the same day, the UN's humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, warned that a ground mission into Rafah, quote, could lead to a slaughter in Gaza. Separately, truce talks among the US, Egypt, Israel and Qatar ended with little progress on Tuesday.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In the United States, the Senate on Tuesday passed a $95.34 billion aid package for Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan. The Democratic-led Senate voted 70 to 29 in favor of the bill, passing the chamber's 60-vote threshold. The votes were cast just before sunrise after a group of conservatives who opposed the bill engaged in a 6-hour-long overnight filibuster. In the end, 22 Republican senators gave their support. The legislation will now move ahead to discover its fate in the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Republicans. The aid package must be approved by both houses of Congress before President Biden can sign it into law. While President Biden welcomed the approval, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has previously criticized the legislation, saying the government is silent on the most pressing issue facing the U.S., referring to security problems at the country's southern border. Now to Indonesia, where voting is set to begin Wednesday for the country's general election. More than 204 million of the country's 270 million people are registered to vote and will be choosing not only their president and vice president, but also parliamentary and local representatives. With President Joko Widodo reaching the end of the maximum of 2 terms allowed, the race for the top position is well underway. Anies Baswedan, Prabowo Subianto, and Ganjar Pranowo are chasing the top job in the world's 3rd largest democracy, alongside their respective running mates Muhaimin Iskandar, Gibran Rakabuming, and Mahfoud MD. 54-year-old Baswedan and 55-year-old Pranowo are each former governors of Jakarta and Central Java, respectively, whereas the current defense minister Subianto is a former Special Forces commander. Subianto is running for the 3rd time amid criticism surrounding his running mate Rakabuming, who is the son of the incumbent president and, despite being under the legal age to run for office, has been given the green light by a constitutional court. In what the Indonesians call its Festival of Democracy, voting day is a public holiday. If no presidential candidate passes the 50% vote threshold, the top 2 candidates will compete in a runoff on June 26th. The new president will be sworn in on October 20th. In India, police fired tear gas and water cannons at protesting farmers marching the north of the country on the border of Punjab and Haryana states on Tuesday. Farmers, who form an influential voting bloc in India, are demanding that the government honors a promise made in 2021 regarding the setting of minimum crop prices. Dozens died in a year-long farmers' protest in 2020. Protesters are attempting to march towards Delhi, which the authorities have blocked with razor wire, cement blocks and fencing on 3 sides. This comes as Prime Minister Narendra Modi seeks a 3rd consecutive term in office at this year's general elections. A United Nations report released on Monday says nearly half of the world's migratory species are declining in population. According to the first ever State of the World's Migratory Species report prepared by the United Nations Environment Programme, about 44% of migratory species worldwide and more than a fifth of some 1,200 species monitored by the UN are threatened with extinction. Overexploitation and habitat loss due to human activity are cited as the main reasons. The report added that the biggest concern is the threat to migratory fish, with 97% of known species on the brink of extinction. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. A winter jacket might feel too warm today. Afternoon highs should go up even higher than Tuesday, soaring to 16 degrees in the capital. But there will be a sharp drop in ratings tomorrow with a wintry mix in store. Then lows will go back to below freezing by Friday morning. It's just cloudy in the capital area, but it's a rainy Wednesday for southern provinces. Jeju could see 10 to 40 millimeters of showers, while the rest of the south could see 5 to 20 millimeters of rainfall before it all lets up tonight. After the highs are similar to slightly higher than yesterday at 17 degrees in Daejeon. Gyeongju, Jeju, Gwangju will see a high of 19 degrees this afternoon. Air quality will be normal to good all day with strong winds expected in the east of Gangwon-do province. Then a mix of rain and snow is in the forecast for tomorrow, starting from the capital and west of Gangwon-do province. And especially mountainous regions in Gangwon-do need to brace for heavy snow of up to 15 centimeters, and that will bring a brief wintry chill to the country on Friday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our panel session with our foreign correspondents. Do stay with us.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
North Korea ushered in the Lunar New Year with yet another weapons test this past weekend and more bellicose rhetoric about South Korea perishing if provoked. So what is the significance of the latest weapons test by North Korea? How are pundits explaining the relative calm in South Korea despite the rampant threats by North Korea? And what are the prospects of Seoul's diplomatic ties with its neighbours and allies this year? Welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today I have our panel of foreign journalists for their thoughts on the latest developments here on the Peninsula and more. I have Nicholas Rocker with me. Nicholas, welcome.
Good to be here.
I also have Jack Barton with us. Jack, it's good to have you back.
It's great to be back.
Right, Nicholas, let's start off then with news of another missile test by North Korea that took place earlier on this Wednesday, as well as a weapons test, I believe, that took place on Sunday, and its significance, of course.
Well, it's in the line of what we've been seeing recently from North Korea. There's been a lot of cruise missile tests. That's also the one that's been tested today off the coast of Wonsan. So yeah, we've seen a lot of cruise missile tests, and all of the recent military developments have seem to have the same target, which is South Korea. We did not see recently any big intercontinental ballistic missile tests that could, send more a message to the United States. It's been more weapons that could be used for localized conflict in the region, Japan, in the peninsula, or maybe the island of Guam. The other weapon that was tested Sunday was artillery system for 240 millimeter rocket shells. It seems like experts have been saying that it's similar to previous weapons that have been used by North Korea. This is not an entirely new development. Apparently, the accuracy is superior, and it's a qualitative change according to the propaganda. It's hard to know because very few photos have been released. It's hard to assess its efficiency. But I mean, all those weapon tests are of significance, but it's more of a general trend, and I would maybe worry more of the capacity, for instance, of a KN-23 short-range ballistic missile that we've seen being used in Ukraine, which will give North Korea real-life data of how their weapon will perform. The cruise missile also may represent a form of target, a form of threat, because they are harder to intercept for a South Korean defense system. So there's a diversity of weapons development in North Korea, and most of them are clearly now recently directed towards what they call now their main enemy, which is here, South Korea.
Right, indeed. And talking about that, Jack, addressing an audience at a military anniversary, I believe last Thursday, Kim Jongun called South Korea North Korea's primary enemy and reiterated, as Nicholas pointed out, his intentions to destroy South Korea if provoked. What do you suppose, Jack, is behind the latest hardline rhetoric by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, and of course this isn't the first time he's mentioned that in the past few months, talking about the need to suppress South Korea if there's a contingency and take back control, and a lot of warlike talk. We've seen a diversity of opinions, perhaps the most alarmist coming from Siegfried Hecker and Robert Cullen. The latter used to work with the US State Department, was actually involved in North Korean talks. Both of those gentlemen, in an opinion piece, saying they believe that he has made the decision at some point to go to war again and to actively, to militarily try to wrest back control of South Korea. Others saying, well, we should take the weapon systems development very seriously. There's no real signs of that. You don't go shipping off so many ballistic missiles and artillery pieces to Russia if you're preparing for a war yourself. And also, We know that a lot of the army has been mobilized for agricultural work. So you don't do that if you're preparing for a war around the corner. And nonetheless, they say, you know, all the steps being taken are alarming, and others again saying, look, this is part of the regular election process. We've got National Assembly elections coming up here, so we would normally have saber rattling to try and get some members of the Assembly who are more favourable, at least to trying for better relations with Pyongyang, and then we have the presidential elections in the US coming up at the end of the year, and we always see major saber rattling. So my personal opinion is it's probably a little bit of all of that, but I would also just put that aside and point out, you know, what we all know is when North Korea says it's going to do something, it almost never does. So if it says we're going to blow this up or turn Seoul to ashes, but when it does something like sinking the Cheongwadae in 2010 or artillery on Yongpyong or laying landmines that maim Seoul, it never telegraphs that. So whatever it's saying probably isn't going to happen, but something probably will happen, but we won't have any insight into what that is until it does.
Right, and against that backdrop, Nicholas, though, despite the aggressive posture by North Korea, the public here in South Korea appears to be little affected by the bellicose rhetoric, as reported by the Associated Press. Now, could you tell us a bit more about that particular coverage, and also, of course, your own observations here in South Korea with regard to the public response?
Well, it's hard to blame South Koreans to being used to 70 years of, you know, different cycle of escalation, diplomatic talks. So I think, yeah, what the Associated Press pointed out is that globally the general feeling is concern, but not an alarming situation. And if you take a look on the younger generation, for instance, it makes sense. I mean, the ties with North Korea are now very distant for them. The relationship is different. The desire for unification is not as acute as it's been. So all of this makes sense. This being said, as Jack pointed out, there are reasons for concerns of some form of contingency happening on the peninsula, and you can feel that the Korean public has some worries. First of all, I think the main one is the trust in the United States to react in case of major escalation. In a way, there's the idea like, will the United States sacrifice San Francisco or Los Angeles to different Seoul? Probably not, say, a lot of persons. And you can see that in different kinds of surveys, because there's now an overwhelming majority of South Koreans that are in favor of either a national program for nuclear weapons or the maybe US nuclear weapons deployed directly in the peninsula. So there are concerns, and then depending on where you go, who you speak to, there also are some concerns. As Jack mentioned, there's been shelling in Yeonpyeong in 2010. I've been there recently, and of course, all this atmosphere is very worrying for the inhabitants there, for the residents. On the 5th of January, they were summoned to go to shelters for a couple of hours. It brings back very painful memories for them. Other regions, other border region, of course, they're seeing more military deployed near the border. So there are some concerns. That is true, but I mean, in a way, people are used to it here, so I think it's a bit of both. Right,
to a certain extent we have become inert then. Jack, Pyongyang also recently voted in favor of dissolving inter-Korean economic initiatives. Now, in response, pundits here have voiced a bit of concern about the disruption of these diverse cross-border engagements. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is really in line with what Kim Jong-un has been doing for the last month, which is ripping up every agreement that is aimed at inter-Korean cooperation. In a way, it makes sense, given he's designated South Korea as an enemy state, making it clear that there is no Korea, there is no one nation on a peninsula, there is a DPRK and an ROK. In a sense, saying these are two separate people and, you know, trying to build the policy around this new, I suppose, philosophical direction. But also South Korea in January dissolved a foundation, a state-backed foundation aimed at promoting the Kaesong Joint Industrial Area. So South Korea has quietly been doing what North Korea is doing very loudly at the moment, and clearly there is intended to be an effect coming from Pyongyang, otherwise you wouldn't do it so loudly. But really, it's just reflecting the reality. There is no economic cooperation between North Korea and South Korea. There is no prospect of economic cooperation. The Mount Kumgang tours have really been mothballed after that South Korean tourist was shot back in 2008. There's no sign of Kaesong Industrial Area, which once had 125 companies, I think more than 50,000 North Korean workers in there. After that was shut down in 2016, there is no sign at all that that will be reopened again. So in a sense, yes, it is just reflecting the reality on the ground. But having said that, I think with North Korea, there is an effect that they are intending to get from this loud and dramatic proclamation. What that effect is, of course, again, we can only guess. Perhaps Kim Jong-un, perhaps his sister Kim Yo-jong and a few others really know what the intent is. But overall, it's just reflecting the reality.
Right. Beyond the Korean Peninsula, Nicholas, Seoul, for its part, has been calling on Beijing to take on a more constructive role with regard to Pyongyang-related matters. Now, Beijing, in response, called on Seoul to take on a more friendly, optimistic, objective, that is, and friendly China policy. All that being said, what are your thoughts with regard to Seoul-Beijing ties this year?
Well, I don't see any major changes on the North Korean aspect of things. Maybe Beijing is not that happy with the new bromance between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, but they might not show it openly. I don't see any change on the position on North Korean defectors, for instance. I think Beijing, in a way, is quite content with the status quo. It doesn't want a war because it's right there at its border, so close to Beijing. I'm not sure they will be very happy also with major escalation around the Yellow Sea, where they have their own interest there. So on this side of things, I don't see, unless, there's a change in the current administration here, change in the administration in the United States, unless there's a lot of, geopolitical changes, I don't see any major evolution of the Beijing policy. On the Seoul side, I think President Yoon China policy has been finally, in a way, quite balanced. He's been pointing out, he's been friendlier and friendlier with Washington. The islands, he made the alliance stronger. Of course, this annoyed Beijing. He made some declaration on the Taiwan Strait that highly displeased Xi Jinping. But at the same time, when Nancy Pelosi came after her trip to Taiwan, here he didn't see her. He was nowhere to be seen. So I think he's trying to, see where the South Korean interests are in this relationship. And they're mostly economic, in a way. We've seen, for the first time, trade deficit. Lower exports from South Korea to China, lower imports from China to South Korea. So, the economic relation is not going so well, but the two countries need each other on the economic front. South Korea is still a major partner for China when it comes to semiconductors. SK Hynix, Samsung have large factories there. So I think we could see more of the same. That being said, the trilateral talks between Tokyo, Beijing, and Seoul have started again at some lower level. Let's see if the three leaders will meet next year. There had been talk for a meeting, and we didn't see that happen. So let's see if there's some major change. But I think, it's hard to guess always that we could see more of the same.
Right, hopefully trilateral talks this particular year then. Jack, staying with diplomatic ties, former US President, that is, Donald Trump, he raised quite a bit of alarm with remarks this past weekend about letting Russia have its way with any NATO member who fails to pay for defense. Keeping that in mind, what are the implications of these remarks for the ROK-US defense alliance under a possible Trump leadership?
Yeah, there is a little bit of separation of the issues. So often Trump says something that perhaps even the Democrats fundamentally agree with, but says it in a way that is just, to quote Biden on this one, dumb, shameful, and dangerous. And I would have to agree with those comments. The issue of underfunding of NATO is real in some countries. They're supposed to be 2% of GDP. Many countries are under that, Germany included. The big exception, of course, is a lot of the states that border Russia. Some of them have much higher, almost double that level. And not just the Republicans, but the Democrats have quietly been trying to get these countries to put more in a while. And Trump really has sort of taken a dislike, I think, to NATO, and it's quite personal. There is less of that here in Asia. There is less of that antagonism. And Korea, for the past few years, even though it's not part of NATO, has a mission there since 22, it's been spending about 2.5% of its GDP on defence. So it's actually above the NATO average. So it would be hard for Trump to take aim at South Korea on that issue anyway. But what we've seen is Trump is very transactional. So it's like, he doesn't really care about traditional alliances or what it means for freedom and democracy or where America stands in Israel. It's transactional. And so what are we getting out of this? And in the past, he's threatened to take the troops out of South Korea. We've seen all the fuss over the funding of the Camp Humphreys. And we're seeing ahead of the election that South Korea has pushed forward the latest round of negotiation to try and get that out of the way just in case Trump comes in. So we're not going to see that issue, I think, of funding in the same way that NATO is being targeted. But that doesn't mean there won't be a lot of trouble if Trump does come to power. And without any doubt, he'll be pressuring South Korea to do things. And as Nicola mentioned, there will be I think the talk again of should we have nuclear weapons here in South Korea will gain momentum if there is a Trump presidency.
Right. And Nicholas, how does a re-election of Trump look to affect Europe's concerns over a broader Russian aggression?
It doesn't look very good for Europeans. I mean, when you have a candidate for the U.S. presidency that says that, that invites Russia in a way to invade countries that don't respect the 2% GDP defense investment, of course, it doesn't look really good. And it's had, there was a lot of comments in Europe. Josep Borrell, one of the head of the European Commission, mentioned that NATO cannot depend on the humor of a president of the United States. There's been Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany, that said that EU should go into war economy. President Emmanuel Macron also mentioned that. I think it kind of reignited the talks about Europe defense, EU of defense, in a way that has been in the books for a long time. But I think the European Union and all the countries in Europe, in NATO, made the choice to go towards the US solution that they deemed at the time maybe less costly and more efficient. But right now what we're seeing in Europe is that there's a real struggle to make ends meet in terms of the promise that has been done to Ukraine to send weapons. The promises are far from being met. We can see that a lot of the big defense industries, France, France, Germany, and others struggle to produce and to send the weapons to Ukraine, as well as make their stocks, refurnish their stocks. So I think now Europe has a very little amount of time to prepare itself to the possible consequences of a Trump presidency. On the prospect of a larger Russian invasion, it's very hard to predict because it depends on so many different factors, how it will go in Ukraine right now, the war readiness posture of NATO. It's a bit hard to predict, but definitely it created a lot of discussion in Europe and possibly some changes.
Right. And Jack, do you suppose a return by Mr. Trump to the White House would perhaps create fresh momentum for the impasse here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I don't know if it would create momentum in a good way. We can never tell what Trump's going to do. There might be a miracle and it might be positive. It would be unlikely that Kim Jongun would want to engage in dialogue again, given the humiliation of the Hanoi summit and the fact he's been a lot of this missile testing and behavior is probably, in a way, trying to wash away the humiliation of the outcome of that summit. So going back into that for another round, I don't think would be on his mind. Maybe it would happen. But I think it'll be quite the opposite. It'll be more, as Nicola was just describing, for Europe. It'll be similar here. And if we look at Ukraine, this is a country that when it gave up its nuclear stockpile, one of the world's biggest, the US, along with others, the European Union, gave it a security pledge. And this was a cross-party security pledge. So this was the Republicans and the Democrats coming together and saying, give up your nuclear weapons, and if you're attacked, we pledge to defend you. And so we can already see that is absolutely hollow with the Republican Party in general. The Democrats have lived up to their part. So yes, if Trump comes into power, we can see the Ayatollah in Iran looking around going, well, what can we do? What can we get away with? Although he tends to be tougher on Iran and a bit more pro Israel. But certainly, I think Putin will feel he has a much freer hand with Trump in power to do what he wants. I think Kim Jong-un will feel he has a much freer hand to do things while Trump's in power. And this is a huge danger. I think while there is a Trump presidency, everyone who's been wanting to do something, perhaps Taiwan, Trump's already kind of indicated in his last presidency he would give a pass to China if it forcibly took back Taiwan. So this is a very dangerous time, and unfortunately it's looking like it may be a fait accompli for a Trump presidency it will be nervous times ahead. I don't think it will be positive momentum, unfortunately. I suspect it will be quite the opposite. I hope I'm wrong.
Oh, me too. I hope you're wrong right there. Nicholas, North Korea, while it has been dismantling its cross-border initiatives with South Korea, it has been boosting its engagements with Russia. In fact, the first group of Russian tourists, I believe, traveled to North Korea last Friday, since the pandemic, that is. Do tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, it was a test. We're not seeing yet any long-term prospect of tourists coming back to North Korea. It was an agreement between a region and North Korea, so a bit less than 100 Russian tourists were able to go to North Korea from the 9th to the 12th of this month. They went to discover the slopes of a ski resort in North Korea. It's significant in a way that it's the first foreign tourists, and we see the interest of North Korea in welcoming more tourists. It's a moneymaker. That very short trip was around $750 per visitor. So we see the interest of North Korea, but it doesn't say anything on how it will open and if it will open. Maybe one of the possibilities is that it will open to friendly countries in a way. They could also open larger more countries. It's hard to guess what it means, but it's in a way a good prospect on the will to open from the DPRK.
Right, open up its borders then. All right, well, I believe that's all the time we have for this edition then. Nicholas, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Jack, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Always a pleasure.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye. We return same time tomorrow. That is Thursday. Do join us then.